I thought my husband was cheating with his stepsister. The truth was worse. She assaulted him years ago and was blackmailing him for thousands. She pushed too far, and I finally made her pay the price. There's a certain kind of light in our backyard, just before dusk, a soft, golden glow that filters through the leaves of the lemon grove and makes everything look like a memory. For years, that was my favorite time of day. It was the time Liam would get home from work, his briefcase hitting the floor with a familiar thud, and he'd find me on the patio, a glass of iced tea waiting for him. Our home wasn't grand, but it was ours, a testament to 7 years of marriage, of shared dreams and quiet sacrifices, nestled in a neighborhood where the loudest sound were lawnmowers on a Saturday morning. Our story was the kind people envied. We met in our early 20s, two people with a shared sense of humor and an unspoken understanding that we were building something permanent. I was a graphic designer with a promising offer from a firm in San Francisco. He was an architectural engineer, deeply rooted in our hometown, tethered by a family he adored. I chose him. I chose this life. I told myself that giving up a corner office with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge for a quiet life with a man I loved wasn't a sacrifice, but a privilege. For a long time, I even believed it. I had become an expert in the art of the small surrender, trading a piece of my opinion for a moment of family peace, telling myself it was the price of a happy home. The photos on our mantelpiece told that story. There was Liam and me on our wedding day, beaming. There was us covered in paint, laughing in our empty living room the day we got the keys. And there were countless photos of us with his family. His father, George, George's second wife, Brenda, and Brenda's daughter, Chloe. Liam's stepsister, the shadow in the corner of our perfect picture. Chloe had entered Liam's life when he was 18, a year before I met him. Her mother, Brenda, a woman with a nervous, fluttering energy, had married Liam's recently divorced father. Chloe was 17 at the time, all sharp angles and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Because they hadn't grown up together, their dynamic was always off. It lacked the easy, teasing rhythm of a true sibling relationship. Instead, it was charged with an intensity one could never quite name, but that always left a cold knot in my stomach. She was a constant presence in our lives, a satellite in a decaying orbit around my husband. At family dinners, she would make a point to sit next to him, her chair just a little too close to his. While he was telling a story, her hand would find his arm, her fingers lingering longer than necessary. He would subtly shift away, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes that only I seemed to notice, but he never said a word. If I walked into a room where they were talking, the conversation would stop for a beat, and Chloe would look at me, that same unreadable smile playing on her lips. It was a silent challenge, a reminder that she held a piece of his history that I would never be a part of. Her favorite weapon was the inside joke, a casual reference to some event from before my time. She'd say, "Oh, Liam, remember that disastrous camping trip? Amelia, you would have hated it," and they would share a laugh, a small, impenetrable circle of two. I would force a smile, the dutiful wife, the good sport. But inside, I felt a familiar chill. I was the outsider. "Oh, Amelia, you're being so sensitive," she'd say, her voice dripping with faux concern, whenever I showed the slightest sign of annoyance. "We're just family. It's not like that." And I, the expert peacekeeper, would let it go. Because what could I say? That the way she looked at my husband made my skin crawl? That her casual touches felt like a violation? I would sound like the crazy, jealous wife. So I swallowed my feelings again and again, convincing myself it was my own insecurity. Liam, for his part, navigated these moments with a tense diplomacy. He would gently redirect the conversation or create physical space between them, but he never, ever confronted her. I saw it as our shared burden, a silent pact to manage Chloe's difficult personality for the sake of his father's happiness. I thought we were on the same team, but in the year leading up to our 7th anniversary, the whispers of a problem grew louder. Our finances, which should have been comfortable, were perpetually strained. I managed our budget, and I started noticing discrepancies, small at first, then larger. When I asked Liam about a significant withdrawal, he'd become vague and defensive. "It's just helping out family," he'd say, or, "It's a bad investment I'm paying off. Don't worry about it." But his father was a wealthy man, and Chloe always seemed to have a new designer bag or was talking about her latest vacation. It didn't add up. Then came the nights I'd find him wide awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, a muscle in his jaw twitching, or the way his hands would tremble almost imperceptibly after a phone call that he took in another room. When I'd wrap my arms around him, I could feel the tension humming through his body like a live wire. "Work stress," he'd murmur, but his eyes were haunted by something far deeper. A prickle of real fear would go through me, a fear I'd push down with practiced efficiency. Denial was my sanctuary. We decided to throw a big party for our 7th anniversary. In my mind, it was a chance to reaffirm our love, to fill our home with joy and laughter and push back against the encroaching shadows. I wanted to see our friends and family celebrating with us in that golden, late afternoon light in our garden. I hoped it would be a reset button, a way to wash away the strange, unspoken tension that had settled over our lives. I was a fool. I thought I was polishing a memory. I didn't realize I was setting the stage for an execution. The day of the party was perfect, deceptively so. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Our rose garden, my pride and joy, was in full bloom, the air thick with the sweet, heavy scent of petals and freshly cut grass. I'd strung fairy lights through the branches of the lemon grove, and as evening approached, they began to twinkle to life, casting a magical glow over the laughing faces of our friends and family. For a few hours, I allowed myself to believe in the illusion. I held Liam's hand, his fingers warm and solid in mine, and I felt a surge of love so powerful it almost erased the months of quiet anxiety. The illusion shattered, as they always do, with the cutting precision of a shard of glass. It happened during the gift opening, a ritual I'd always found slightly awkward but endured for the sake of tradition. Friends gave us bottles of wine, gift cards to our favorite restaurant, a beautiful hand-painted platter. Then it was Chloe's turn. She made a show of it, of course. She stood up, commanding the attention of the entire party. "First, for Amelia," she said, her voice bright and performative. She handed me a small, neatly wrapped box. Inside was a generic scented candle, the kind you buy at a drugstore checkout. "I know how much you love making the house feel cozy," she said with a saccharine smile. I murmured my thanks, my cheeks warm with a familiar mix of annoyance and embarrassment. Then she turned to Liam. Her whole demeanor shifted. Her voice softened, becoming intimate, conspiratorial. "And for Mael," she said, producing a much larger, heavier box wrapped in expensive, shimmering paper. Liam took it, a look of confusion on his face. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a watch. But not just any watch. It was a vintage Omega Speedmaster, the exact 1960s model he'd obsessed over for years, the one he'd pointed out in magazines and museum displays, the one we both knew was impossibly, astronomically out of our price range. A collective gasp went through the small crowd. "There's an inscription," Chloe prompted, her eyes gleaming. "Read it out loud." Liam's face was pale. He picked up the watch, his hands unsteady, and turned it over. His voice was tight, strained, as he read the words etched into the polished steel back. "For Mael, time stands still when I'm with you. Always see." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete I could hear the hum of the string lights, the distant chirp of a cricket. Every eye was on us. The message wasn't just a gift. It was a declaration. It was a flag planted firmly in the center of my marriage, a brazen public claim. I felt the blood drain from my face. It felt like poison being poured directly into the heart of my marriage, in front of everyone I loved. Later that night, long after the last guest had departed, leaving behind a trail of empty glasses and forced smiles, the dam of my restraint finally broke. The house was quiet, the romantic fairy lights, now looking garish and mocking. "What was that, Liam?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. What in the world was that? He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stood by the fireplace, running a hand through his hair. "Amelia, don't. She's just, you know how she is. She's dramatic." "Dramatic?" My voice rose, cracking. That watch costs more than our car. The inscription. Liam, she's not just dramatic. She's trying to humiliate me. To destroy us. Fueled by a surge of adrenaline and a desperate need for a truth he wouldn't give me, I did something I'd never done before. I grabbed my laptop from the counter, my hands shaking as I opened it. I went to our joint banking website, my heart pounding against my ribs. I logged in, and there it was. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was a recurring monthly transfer, labeled Family Support, $2,000, every single month, for the past 6 years. I did the math in my head, a cold, sickening calculation. Over $150,000, transferred from our shared savings, the money we were putting aside for our future, for children, for a life together, directly into her account. What is this? I whispered, turning the screen towards him. What is this family support, Liam? He looked at the screen, and for a second, I saw a raw panic in his eyes before it was masked by a weary defensiveness. It's for her business, he stammered. A startup she's trying to launch. I was helping her. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd worry about the money. I was going to tell you. The lie was so flimsy, so insulting in its weakness, that it felt like a slap. A startup? For 6 years? Liam, stop lying to me. I was screaming now. Are you sleeping with her? Are you funding her entire life behind my back? No, of course not. Amelia, my God, he insisted, but the denial was hollow, lost in the overwhelming evidence of his deception. Unbeknownst to me, we weren't the only ones unsettled by the display. George, Liam's father, had cornered him briefly before leaving the party. George was a meticulous man, a retired accountant who lived by numbers and logic. He had noticed his son's financial strain for years, just as he'd noticed his stepdaughter's increasingly lavish lifestyle. That was an expensive gift, son, George had said, his voice low and serious. Is everything all right? Those loans you've been giving her, are they for a real business? Liam had fed him the same weak lie, and George, a human lie detector when it came to finances, had walked away with a deep, furrowed brow, a seed of active investigation planted in his mind. The next day, Chloe escalated her attack. I received a phone call from a close mutual friend, her voice laced with a confused concern. Amelia, honey, are you okay? Chloe called me this morning. She's so worried about you. She said you've become really paranoid and controlling lately, and that your jealousy is tearing Liam apart. I felt the floor drop out from under me. She wasn't just attacking me in private. She was poisoning my friendships, painting me as the villain in a story she had written. Driven by a desperate, foolish need to clear the air, I went to George's house that afternoon. I needed an ally, but only Chloe was home. She met me in the kitchen, a smirk playing on her lips. The pretense of sweetness was gone. Her eyes were cold, hard chips of ice. You really don't get it, do you? She said, her voice a low purr. She took a step closer, invading my space. You're just a chapter in his life. A comfortable, convenient chapter. But I'm the whole story. I was there before you, and I'll be there long after you're gone. He'll always choose me. So do yourself a favor. Walk away before you lose what little dignity you have left. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't drama. This was war. And I had just been handed my declaration. I drove home in a daze, Chloe's venomous words echoing in my ears. The quiet suburban streets, once a symbol of my peaceful life, now felt like a cage. When I walked through my own front door, the scent of lemon and old books that I usually found so comforting felt suffocating. Liam was in the living room, pacing. The look on his face was one of pure dread. He knew I'd seen her. She told me to leave you, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the tears I thought would be there. She told me you'd always choose her. I stood before him, the man I had built my entire world around. So choose Liam. Right now. Tell me the truth, the whole truth, or I'm gone. It's her or me. I saw the war in his eyes. Years of ingrained fear wrestled with the immediate terror of losing me. And in that critical, soul-defining moment, his fear won. Amelia, please, he begged, his voice cracking. The words were a cascade of weakness and evasion. You're twisting things. You don't understand our history. She's just difficult. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is. To hear him defend her, to minimize the poison she had just poured into my ear, to choose his secret over my sanity, that was the ultimate betrayal. It was worse than any affair. It was the complete annihilation of our partnership. Something inside me went cold and quiet. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply turned, walked past him, and went into our bedroom. I pulled my suitcase from the top of the closet, the wheels rattling on the hardwood floor. The sound was deafening in the silence of the house. I opened drawers, methodically taking out clothes, toiletries, the essentials of a life about to be fractured. Each folded shirt was a final goodbye to the woman I used to be, the woman who kept the peace. She was dead. I was packing her away. The sight of the open suitcase on the bed, the tangible proof of my departure, finally broke him. He appeared in the doorway, his face ashen. He didn't speak. He just slid down the doorframe and collapsed, his body racked with deep, gut-wrenching sobs that seemed to be torn from the very core of his being. He was a dam of secrets that had just burst. She hurt me. He choked out between ragged breaths, his words barely coherent. That summer, before I met you, at the lake house. I stopped packing, my hand frozen on a stack of sweaters. He told me everything. It poured out of him in a torrent of shame and pain that had been held back for more than a decade. It wasn't an affair. It was an assault. He'd been 20, drunk at a family party. He'd woken up in a guest room, disoriented and sick, with her on top of him. He remembered flashes of it, a nightmarish confusion and a profound, paralyzing shame. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened, and in his youthful terror and embarrassment, he buried it. He was a man. Who would believe him? He was the guy who slept with his stepsister. The shame was a poison he swallowed alone. The blackmail started when we got engaged. First, it was emotional. If you tell anyone, she had texted him, you'll destroy your father's marriage. It'll be your fault. Then, after we were married, it became financial. The startup was a fiction, a cover for her extortion. Every time he resisted, she'd threaten to go to me, to his father, to his employers, with a twisted version of the story where he was the aggressor, the one obsessed with her. He showed me his phone, scrolling through years of texts. They were chilling. Thinking of you, she'd write followed by, my rent is due. Or, you look so good today, followed by, I need $2,000 for marketing expenses by Friday. He wasn't her lover. He was her hostage. My own pain was eclipsed by a white-hot, protective fury. My grief for the marriage I thought I had was replaced by a cold, clear resolve. This was no longer just his trauma. It was an attack on my home, my husband, my future. And it was going to end. I walked over to the bed and deliberately unpacked my suitcase. I put every item back in its place. Liam watched me, his tear-streaked face filled with a fragile, desperate hope. This ends now, I said, my voice as steady as steel. We are not running. We are fighting. I looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time he saw not the gentle peacekeeper, but a commander. Get a notepad. Write down everything you remember. Dates, amounts, specific threats. Everything. Your father suspects something. I saw it in his eyes at the party. We are going to talk to him. We need an ally, not just a witness. The next morning, we sat in George's study. The room smelled of old leather and wood polish. I watched as Liam, his voice trembling but determined, told his father everything. George listened without interruption, his face growing progressively harder, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his leather chair. When Liam finished, George didn't offer platitudes. He stood up, walked to his desk, and unlocked a drawer. I knew it, he said, his voice thick with a rage I had never heard from him before. I knew he was lying to me about that business. He turned to us, his eyes filled with a father's fierce regret. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my gut told me something was deeply wrong. I hired a private investigator last week. He laid a manila folder on the desk. My hands shook as I opened it. It was a complete dossier on Chloe's life. Bank statements showed Liam's money being spent not on software or marketing, but on luxury trips to Italy, on designer bags from Chanel, on a down payment for a new BMW. There were photos of her, laughing on a beach in a five-star resort. The very week she'd told Liam She needed money for urgent server costs. It was all there. Cold, hard, undeniable proof of fraud and a lifestyle funded by extortion. The evidence was a weapon, and I knew exactly how we were going to use it. I was the one who made the call. I was the one who planned the intervention. It wouldn't be a messy, emotional family argument. It would be a clinical, calculated takedown. I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davis, whose online reviews all said the same thing. She does not lose. We gathered again in George's study. Me, Liam, and George on one side of the large mahogany desk. 2 empty chairs on the other. Chloe and Brenda arrived together. Chloe looking smug and confident. Brenda looking nervous but ready to defend her daughter. "I'm glad we're all here," Chloe began, launching into a prepared speech about my emotional instability. I let her speak for a full minute. Then I held up a hand. "Chloe," I said, my voice calm and clear. "You told Liam you needed money for a software development startup. A fascinating venture. Can you tell us where you were on the week of May 14th? My bank statement says you were in Tuscany." The color drained from her face. As she stammered, George slid the PI's report across the desk. The glossy photos, the highlighted bank statements. Brenda gasped. This is a misunderstanding. My daughter would never." At that exact moment, as planned, the study door opened and Ms. Davis walked in. She placed her leather briefcase on the desk with a soft click. "Brenda," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "My name is Eleanor Davis. I'm representing Amelia and Liam." She looked from Brenda's horrified face to Chloe's ashen one. "I suggest you stop talking. What we have here isn't a misunderstanding. It's evidence of wire fraud, extortion, and blackmail, carrying a potential federal prison sentence of up to 20 years. Now, shall we discuss your options?" The power in the room didn't just shift. It shattered. Chloe, the master manipulator, the queen of her own dark story, was finally, utterly silenced. The aftermath was not a celebration. It was a demolition. Ms. Davis, with the cold precision of a surgeon, laid out the terms. There would be no negotiation. Option 1. Chloe would sign a legally binding repayment agreement for a significant portion of the extorted money, structured over 10 years. She would also sign a permanent, ironclad non-contact order, forbidding her from ever speaking to, texting, emailing, or coming within 500 feet of me or Liam. She would walk out of this house and out of our lives forever. Option 2. We would walk out of this study and go directly to the U.S. Attorney's Office with the PI's folder. Brenda, her face a mask of disbelief and horror, looked at her daughter, waiting for a denial, an explanation, anything. But there was none. Chloe just sat there, shrunken and pale, the smugness completely erased, replaced by the raw, ugly face of fear. She signed the papers, her hand trembling so violently she could barely form her own name. George stood by the window, his back to the room, but I could see the rigid line of his shoulders. When they were done, he spoke without turning around. "Be out of my house by morning, Chloe." His marriage to Brenda was over. He couldn't look at her without seeing her willful blindness, her instinct to protect the predator instead of the victim. The illusion of their happy, blended family, an illusion for which Liam had paid so dearly, was incinerated in that room. The fallout was messy, painful, and absolute. For a week, there was a strange, hollow silence. The constant threat that had hummed beneath the surface of our lives for a decade was gone, and the quiet it left behind was deafening. I threw myself into my work, finally launching the website for my freelance graphic design business. It was more than a job. It was a reclamation. It was me building something that was mine alone. Then, just as I was beginning to breathe again, Chloe fired her last shot. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt at revenge. I received 2 emails in the same afternoon from potential clients who had been enthusiastic just the day before. Both were backing out. They were polite but vague, both mentioning they'd received an anonymous tip warning them about my personal instability and my involvement in a messy, litigious family dispute. It was her. I knew it instantly. It was a final, desperate attempt to poison my new beginning, to pull me back down into the mud with her. The old Amelia would have panicked. She would have cried. She would have felt the familiar, sickening lurch of despair, the feeling of being unfairly attacked and misunderstood. She would have raged at the injustice of it. But the old Amelia was gone. I read the emails. I felt a flash of hot anger. Yes, but was followed by something else entirely. A profound, weary calm. I saw the act for what it was, the last gasp of a powerless manipulator. She couldn't hurt me with her presence anymore. So, she was trying to hurt me with whispers. She couldn't touch me anymore. I didn't engage. I didn't text Liam in a panic. I didn't even give her the satisfaction of a response. I calmly saved the emails as PDFs. I attached them to a new message addressed to Ms. Davis. My subject line was simple, for your records. The body of the email was even simpler. Ms. Davis, please see attached. It appears the non-contact order is being violated in spirit, if not in letter. Please handle this. Thank you, Amelia. 2 days later, Ms. Davis informed me she had sent a cease and desist letter to Chloe's new address via certified mail. The letter detailed, in terrifying legal language, the severe penalties for violating the court-ordered agreement and added a fresh new threat of a lawsuit for tortious interference with business contracts. The whispers stopped immediately. The battle was finally, truly over. And I had won, not by sinking to her level, but by rising so far above it she could no longer reach me. The months that followed were a quiet, deliberate reconstruction. Liam began intensive therapy to process the trauma he had carried alone for so long. It was a hard, ugly process, and there were days when the shame and anger threatened to swallow him whole. We went to couples counseling, where we learned a new language, one built on brutal honesty rather than comfortable silence. I had to learn to forgive him, not for being a victim, but for his silence, for the years he allowed me to live in a lie, a collateral casualty in a war I didn't know he was fighting. And he had to learn that my love wasn't a given. It had to be earned back with trust and transparency. Our marriage wasn't the same. The easy, unexamined comfort of our early years was gone forever. It was replaced by something quieter, more sober, and infinitely more real. It was a conscious choice we made every single day to see each other, to hear each other, to protect each other. My business flourished. With each new client, with each design I completed, I felt a piece of myself clicking back into place. Our home, once a stage for a humiliating psychodrama, slowly became a sanctuary again. One evening, I found myself sitting on the patio at dusk, watching that familiar golden light filter through the lemon grove. It no longer looked like a bittersweet memory. It looked like the future. Liam came out and sat beside me, taking my hand. There were no secrets between us anymore. There was only the quiet strength of two people who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. She tried to burn down my life, but all she did was burn away the parts of me that were holding me back. She taught me that true peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the strength to face it and protect what is real. I lost the family I thought I had, but in the rubble, I found myself. And that's a foundation no one can ever shake. It makes me wonder, what illusions are you holding on to for the sake of a false peace?